All right, guys, it's time for another Mr. Anderson reviews. This time up, the review plate was The Shepherd, The Path of Souls. Now, many of you will remember that I did a review for the Shepherd back when we actually did the reviews as a written review, and you guys can actually read that review. I'm a huge fan. It's very hard for me to recap it because it's such a powerful and moving story. The best way I could recap for those who haven't read the first book, and you really should, is that it's a story of a father and son and the power of love a father has for a son. But it's so much more than that. It really, really is an all-encompassing tale, and you really have to read it. And I sat down one day and just read it, and I contacted Andre, and I was like, dude, you really, really did a great thing. And of course, the creator is Andre Molinari. I think I got that right finally. And he did an amazing job with this. It was so touching to me, especially being a father. It really resonated with me. Now, one of the problems I had with anything like that is, well, here comes the sequel, The Path of Souls, and it always makes me nervous when I see a sequel book. Even me, when I write another issue to something, I'm always afraid I'll lose the magic with it. So I went into this excited, but also nervous, like, where could the story go? And I'm not going to tell you why it's important, but there was definitely a moment where you're like, well, where could this story go? Now, I sat down today and I read the entire book, and I have my 7 questions, which we will be going over. And I'm going to show you some art from it. We're just going to spin as we go. You guys aren't going to get to see much. I have it zoomed out on purpose, so there's no spoilers. And we're going to start with the first question. Was it worth the cover price? I believe right now you can get it on Amazon or at the table for around 20 bucks, volume 2. It's 125 pages. Right there, that's more than worth it, considering with Marvel and DC, you get 16 pages for like $4 right now. So that's more than worth it. And I know some people will say, well, it's 32 pages for a Marvel book or a DC book. No, it's not. It's 16 pages plus 16 pages of ads. I'm just being honest here. I'm not hating. It's just the truth. So you're getting 125 pages for 20 bucks. It's more than worth the cover price. Did it leave me wanting a continued story? Absolutely. By the time I was done with it, I was engaged with the characters, and I wanted to know what happens next with the characters, the main 2 characters especially. Was I entertained and excited to turn the page? As someone with ADHD, it is always an interesting question to say that, because there are books I put down and I don't go back to them. And especially with Jax running around and all that, and I'll see the book open on my desk and it's halfway read, and I'm like, damn it, I got to finish reading that book. This is not one of those books. This book instantly made me want to know more. I was trying to get my tickets for New York Comic Con for one of my friends as a gift, and I almost lost my queue in line because I was so engrossed by the book that I wanted to keep reading it. I stopped checking it, so that was kind of a funny moment for it. Did the story get me emotionally invested? Yes, and I'll go over to that in a few minutes at the end of this. Were the characters relatable and interesting? Now, here's an interesting point of this. One of the points of the story is that it kind of goes across generations in a unique fashion, where the creator shows you different time periods, and in a very elaborate way, in a very beautifully well done way, where you see different time periods, and you guys see the art changing on the screen. That's reflective of different time periods. So I was very excited about that. Were there problems with the comic book? At 125 pages, it was too short. There were such great characters. I wanted to know more about them. I wanted to see their stories continue. And honestly, I could have gone for a lot more story in this. I could have. And that, of course, leads you to the fact that there's another book coming, and I really want to read that book. So I'm so excited about that. Do I recommend this comic to others? And what is the comic genre? The comic genre is anyone who's a comic book fan. I think anyone who's a comic book fan will instantly fall in love with this. It's definitely an amazing book. It's well written, and I love well written comic books that get you engrossed in it. Again, with the ADHD, sometimes I forget to continue a book. I'll put it down and just not go back to it. When I know something draws into me and I have to finish it and it becomes obsessive with me, I know I like what I'm doing. I know it's an enjoyable thing, and I can say that about it. And do I recommend this book to others? Obviously, I do. Now the 7 questions is kind of short, and I just wanted to take a moment. I really wanted to reflect that this is a story about not just war and battles, but the cost of war and battles. And I want to give a lot of credit to the creator for being able to absolutely bring to life something that is powerful and it's heart touching, and it shows you a side of war that I think this generation's not really aware of. I think that our generation hasn't seen, and the young generation behind me now that's coming up hasn't seen war that the way other generations have. And I really do think that this is a book that as a parent you should make your child read, because it shows the cost of war. And I think that is so powerful and so moving. I was absolutely floored, honestly floored, that this was such an amazing story. And the art in it is beautiful. The storytelling's amazing. I want to see the next book. It shows, and we play war on a game console now like it's a joke, and we forget about the humanity and the cost of humanity. And that's why we're such an advocate for Veterans Wife on Facebook and supporting veterans, because we forget the toll that it takes on human beings. With that said, all I've said, of course, this is going to be an AnderSin approved book. I am absolutely in love with it. I can't wait to read the next part of the book, and I'm excited. And this is going to be split into 2 parts. So this is the first volume of it. I believe the second volume would be there. But you know what? I don't really know that much about it as someone who might be the creator, like a person that we have on the actual show for once. We have Andrea, the creator of this, Molinari. I think I got it right?
Yes.
He is with us, so we can actually discuss this. He didn't hear my review either. I made him sit through it. He didn't know what I was going to say. So the first thing I would ask is, how did you like the review?
Well, obviously it meant something to you, and I'm very touched to hear that.
It really did, you know, because I've always said it. My dad served in the war, Vietnam, and I never got to know my dad as an adult. He died when I was 14. But even being that young, I knew the war affected him. And I was really thankful to see a story speak to that, because even though he survived, you could tell there was a part of him that got left in that war field. And he wouldn't talk about it. He got drunk one night and said some things, and it was horrific to even hear what he was recanting. And it's true. Wars haunt people. Can you talk about that? What inspired this? Because it's so powerful.
Well, actually, I think you'll relate to it, because it was my own father in a lot of ways that is laying behind this. My own father grew up in Italy during World War II. He was born in 1937. You may recall the war begins in 1939. The Italians don't get in the war right away, because remember, the war starts with Germany invading Poland and then the Allies responding. It's only after that first wave of the war, when Germany turns its attention to France and attacks France. At the tail end of that attack, Italy joins the war and begins attacking France and the Allies. The war, of course, ends in 1945. My dad would have been 7.5, 8 years old. And he grew up in the northern part of Italy, which never fell to the Allies in like the southern part of Italy did. And he grew up in Genoa, which was the major naval port in the Med. So there was a lot of bombing. And a few years ago, before my father's death in 2005, my brother went with him to Italy, and my dad was walking in the hometown, and he got to this door frame and he started shaking, visibly shaking. And it took a little while for my brother to get it out of him, but he basically said that when he was a little boy, there was an air raid, then they weren't given any warning. And so he hid in this doorway, and he said he could see the Allied planes, the Spitfires, British planes, coming in and strafing, and so close that he could actually see the face of the pilot as he was strafing at him. And he thought he was going to die in that door frame. And the point that I wanted to share is that, you know, he was a grown man at the time that he's telling this story. And yet that door frame had the ability to bring him back to his childhood in a very violent and powerful way. And so I don't think that we think about the cost of war. We're very quick to be offended by some country and then march troops off to whatever third world, country it is that we've chosen this week to be our enemy. And we fight these wars, and it destroys lives. It destroys lives of the people that are there, the innocent civilians that are always affected by this. And then the people that go and fight these wars, they come home and there's something wrecked, something destroyed in them, and they bring that back, and it has a tremendous impact on their relationships with their families, like what you experienced with your father.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, it's even my grandfather, like you were saying about your dad, my grandfather was from the Ukraine during World War II. And he was forced to work in Germany at a point, as was my grandmother. And that my grandmother was tortured by communists. To this date, I won't do business with a country in a communist country. Like with printers, I can't do anything with Print Ninja because they're a communist country. And I feel that would be betraying what happened to my grandmother who just passed away this year.
Sure.
And, it affected them. It really affected, especially when my grandmother started to have her strokes, man. It brought out this side of her that I think the war had birthed, if that makes sense.
Oh, certainly.
That stuff she went through. And I always said it. I didn't get this when my grandmother had strokes, and that was probably brought on by tar pits. She changed rapidly. And I think that there was a lot of stuff that she never dealt with, and it stays inside of us. And as we get older, we begin to deal with it. And I think that it was so powerful the way that you did this. And I was really happy because when I said, people write that next book, that next sequel, sometimes you're just trying to milk an idea. You know what I mean? You're trying to get it to still keep going. And with you found this vein of absolute brilliance where it's actually argumentative. It's better than the first.
Thank you. That's what the goal is we really don't want to be telling the same story. I mean, obviously we're dealing with souls and we're dealing with trauma. If I've come to this point where people have asked me, how would you summarize the shepherd? And for me, the shepherd's essence is that they work with souls that have suffered some kind of trauma in this life, and that trauma is preventing them from being able to move on in their afterlife. And so that's, that is that core is always going to be there. But the stories and the kinds of stories that we tell are definitely going to change. I mean, I think before, when we were on the air, I was actually telling you that, today I've been editing. Roberto is writing volume 4. And I'm editing that today. And I can assure you that story is a very different story. It's a very different story than what would the first, second, or third. It's definitely going to have a very unique place in the trajectory of what we're doing with the shepherd. But that's kind of our goal, is to do that, is to tell. And if I ever get to the point where I think we're telling the same story over and over again, then we're done. I mean, I think, but I don't think we have to, because we're talking about human experience, and as many people as there are that many different experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with you in that. I don't know, man. I'm excited and I want to know more, but I kind of like that when I read your books, I don't know a lot about them. Even knowing what you told me at the table kind of took away from a couple of the spins and shocks. So I'm always afraid to ask too much about a book that I really like. But this is one of those books that I could see sitting around and talking about for 2 hours with people. You've really done a great job. And I know this is only the first part of it. There's another part just for this story in itself.
Right. Absolutely. That's this first section is called The Path of Souls, which is really kind of the overarching title for the story. But the complete story is 6 issues, 183 pages. And our publisher felt that we needed to break it up into 2 volumes. So it became volume 2 and 3 respectively. Volume 2 is now out and available, as you noted earlier, on Amazon, Kindle. I know it's being gradually rolled out. It'll be run out through Diamond, little by little, it'll get out there. Volume 3 is all done. It just hasn't been published yet. It's just, I think the publisher wants to put a little bit of space between volume 2 and volume 3. But it's done. I mean, it's very readable, as you will find out, because I sent you the digital versions of it to finish the story. I hate to do this to people, is give them a cliffhanger and just leave them there. But that's, you know, that it is a complete story. It is a pretty substantial story. And from a pricing point of view, I think the publisher felt that it would be more accessible if we broke it into 2 parts.
Now, what really makes me excited is the fact that I know from being in comic books that this means that there will be a collector's edition, both of them together. Is that something you would do with like a hardcover? Like, how would you envision making that down the road?
It'll be a hardcover. It'll be a hardcover. I love hardcovers. I think they look great on a bookshelf, and we'll certainly do it. We have a printer that makes that possible for us. You know, I'm sure you've run into this yourself, but you know, when you're a small press or an indie author, you know, buying books, having stock is an issue. It really is, no pun intended with the issue thing. You have to be able to find a printer who can do it affordably, and you have to be able to do it in quantities that make sense. You know, like some of these printers, they want you to print, you know, 5,000 copies. Well, you know, and maybe you get a great price at 5,000 copies, but what in God's name are you going to do with 5,000 copies of books? I mean, that's like 10 years worth of sales for a small creator. And it's just, you just can't sell them fast enough. So now, you know, my wife would kill me if I came back with 5,000 copies. You gotta be kidding.
I got 1,000 copies of my first book, and Irma got rid of like 400 or 600 of them, I think.
Well, there you go.
So, you know, but the funny thing is that you're right, you store it. And the reason I got so many copies was because it was the one issue, your first issue, you could always sell. It'll be those things. But after that, I never planned to get 1,000 of issue number 2. I was going to break it into 500s. But you're right, and that's what the public never learned, is that if we can't get Marvel and DC because of their printing costs. So when you're buying Marvel, you're buying them at a cheaper rate for printing. So that's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, it's a part of it. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The publication costs are significant. That's why it's so important to find a printer that you can work with that will give you a price point that you can at least make a fighting attempt at selling your book. You know, because what a lot of people don't think about is that, you know, when a creator goes to one of these conventions where they meet a creator at a convention, I'm sure you've talked to your people about it, is, you know, you have a table cost that's associated with it that can be substantial. Yep. You know, some of these cons, it's not unheard of to be spending $300, $350 for an artist alley table. That's just to get you in the door.
What about
then you've got parking each day, you know, $10 to $15 parking every day. Then you've got your hotel cost, food, travel. It does add up very quickly. And your profit margin per book,
and don't
got to help you to be able to get there.
You're absolutely right. And people don't respect how much, I mean, to be an indie creator, the minute you walk in the door, you've already lost. 90% of the time, you know that you've gone there to lose. You're not going to make every dollar back. And I tell people all the time, I don't buy a table to talk to sell books. I buy it to talk to people and meet new fans, because you gotta have a fan base to move forward. How's the fan base been with this? I know you dress up at the show, and I know I've heard people talk highly about your book. That's actually how we met each other, because you had impressed someone who asked me to you, and said I had to check out your stuff, and they were right. To this date, it's been some of my favorite stuff in comics.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. Yeah, you know, the fan base is, you know, obviously you want to produce a product that will have people coming back, want to come back, you know. And it's just, you just do the best you can. You just try to produce, you know, something. It's a strange thing, because I feel it's very important for me not to try to cater to the fan base, in the sense of that, like, what is it that you want me to write about? You know, I think that would be a mistake. I think is that I have to be true to the vision, and then you have to trust that you will find the fan base. The fan base maybe will find you, you know, because I think when you start trying to chase the fad or what's in, you know, like the whole idea of like another zombie book. Look, I'm not against zombies, okay? But you know, you can try to chase something that is by the time you get your book out there produced, that the fad may have already passed, you know, and you didn't do it out of pure passion. It's one thing if you want to do a zombie book out of pure passion for that genre, fine, go for it. It'll be a better book for it. But you gotta, I think that whatever book you write, you have to do because it comes from a deep place within you. And I think that the fan base will recognize that and will want to read your books as a result. That's the theory.
I think that it's a good theory. I mean, it's hard, man. Facebook hasn't made it any easier, and we're competing with not each other, but ourselves, because we really have to put our message out there, and it's so hard because you worry about repeating yourself. You worry about who you're going to, you know, possibly offend by talking about our own stuff too much, right? Like,
absolutely, yeah.
And when you're at the show and no one understands this, and I was with a new creator who's only been doing it a year. He was at one of the tables with me, and he at the beginning of the show, I'm like, just understand this is going to take a toll. It eventually is going to get, like, you're going to say the same thing over and over again. It starts driving you mad. And you're going to get to that moment. And people don't realize that, because every time we see someone, it doesn't matter what the last person said. You got to reset and you got to go again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I describe it as hand-to-hand combat. It's one person at a time. You don't have the financial resources to be doing, you know, just blanket advertisement. You just don't.
Yeah, and
especially if you have art costs. If you're going to continue to produce books, you know, I'm a firm believer in paying my artists a decent wage. You know, that I don't want to take advantage of another creator, stand on someone else's back as I'm producing these things. I feel very strongly about that.
I always ask the artist what they want. What do they get paid for the page? That's it. What do you want? They start the conversation. And if I can't get there, I'm honest about it. Look, I can't. This project, I don't know if it's going to, with one of my books that I'm doing right now, I don't know if there's going to be a market for it. It's about a superhero. And how many people are doing a superhero book?
Sure.
And I have a different twist on it. And I can send it to you as a script. It's like a concept script. So there's a lot of, you know, it's just basic stuff. But you wonder, like, is this going to make money? Because it comes out of our pocket to do this. You know, and then you wonder about your page rates and all that. And people don't get that, man. Putting together these books, and like you said, I love the point you made. When you make your book today, it doesn't mean it's going to be put to the public today. It could be a year later. So you keep that in mind. And anything who makes, and I tell people all the time, if you're making books because you think they sell, you're going to lose. Not because necessarily it won't sell, but because you're never going to put your true passion into it.
Right.
You're not having your own voice. And that's one thing I love about what you create. This is clearly your own voice. And it's a powerful and moving story. How has the reception been to you, like, online?
We're just at the beginning process of it, Rob. I think actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think this is actually the first interview that I've done or review that I've done with somebody who's actually read the book. So yeah, which is kind of cool. Yeah, I mean, it's just, it is, we're really at the beginning stages. And because the book is split into two parts, it's made it a little bit difficult for me to think about how to present this to people. I have the entire book to present to a reviewer, as you know. So I can certainly give the reviewers that, but it's like, it makes it a little bit complicated for the reviewer to say, well, okay, the first part is readily available. You can pick it up, you know, here. The second part has not yet been published. But I'm talking to you about this book, you know, in a complete fashion, even though part of it isn't yet available. So it's, that it makes its own complications.
It certainly does, man. Because whenever I do a review, the first thing I have in my head is, don't fucking ruin anything. Don't ruin anything. Don't. Because it's so hard, because you want to talk about it.
Sure.
And you see that movie and you go to talk to your friends and no one's seen the movie. You're all horrible.
Yeah.
But no, man, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, those stories, like, they feel real. What were the inspirations of some of the time periods? Was it just your favorite time period to go to, and that's why you chose them?
No, you know, essentially these stories, remember I said they deal with trauma, okay, which is what I like ghost stories, but I'm not the person who likes ghost stories for the cheap scare. That does nothing for me. I'm a huge fan of Guillermo del Toro. And most people know him for things like his Hellboy films and his, you know, Pacific Rim, that sort of thing. But I really think that his best film is called The Devil's Backbone, which is actually in Spanish. So you'd have to, unless you understand Spanish, I don't, you get it in subtitles, but it's worth it. I mean, it's totally worth it. It's a superb film. And basically the kind of ghost stories that he tells are ghost stories about souls that have experienced some kind of trauma and are therefore haunting a place until that trauma gets resolved and until there's some kind of resolution for the crime that was committed there, you know, the events that it took place. Those are the kind of ghost stories that I'm interested in telling. And sad to say, but human history is littered with these things. So I didn't have to look very far or hard to find stories that I could, you know, connect to historical events. For example, the story of one of my characters, there are 4 characters that we meet in the context of these volumes. There is a U.S. Marine who died in Fallujah, the Second Battle of Fallujah, November 2004. He's the first character that we meet. We meet a Wendat Native American. The white man called them Huron, and he dies in 1648 fighting the Iroquois, which were their enemies. Then the third character we meet is a Frenchman. You saw a little bit of the art earlier. His name is Henri Jacques Tournier, and he was part of Napoleon's invasion of Egypt and eventually what is modern Israel. And then the fourth character is a Confederate soldier. His name is Will Brannigan, and he fought with the 13th Mississippi and died in Fredericksburg, Maryland in December 1862. Now, the one that I want to focus on is Henri Jacques Tournier, the Frenchman. The battle that he dies as associated with is the Battle of Jaffa, which is outside of modern-day Tel Aviv in Israel. And it takes place March 7th, 1799. And basically this story that you'll encounter in the Path of Souls is actually a true story. Henri is a made-up fictional character, but the story, everything about the story is actually in fact true. The French surround this town of Jaffa that is being held by the Ottoman Empire at the time, who are allied with the British. And they offer terms of surrender, and the Ottomans turn it down. They actually behead. You can see it on the screen there. They actually behead the French ambassador, the one who brought the terms, and they put their heads on pikes outside the city on top of the wall of Jaffa. And the French just lose it. The French just absolutely lose it, and they end up blasting holes in the walls of Jaffa. And when they get into Jaffa, when the French get into Jaffa, the counts vary, but somewhere between 24 and 48 hours, the French command lose control over their own soldiers, and the French savage the civilian population of Jaffa. And there are a lot of crimes that are committed. For example, the Ottoman defenders retreated into the high city, to the fortification of the city, and they were offered terms of surrender by the nephew of Napoleon, and they accepted the terms of surrender. But when Napoleon heard that they had been offered terms of surrender, he was outraged, and he ended up having all those Ottoman soldiers march down to the seashore and shot. It's something like 4,000 or 5,000 of these men were shot on the beach. While all the debauchery and murder and rape was taking place in the city, the French soldiers decided to take a bunch of the young women and bring them back to the French camp as basically concubines. And Napoleon was not happy with this, so he ordered that all those women be brought back to the city of Jaffa. They were brought to a particular city square, and they were executed. hundreds of the women were executed in the kind of final act of brutality. And then the irony of this whole thing is then in the days after that battle, the Black Plague actually broke out. Or I think it's actually the bubonic plague, excuse me, broke out among the French soldiers. And it was thought that that was somehow retribution for what they had done to the civilian population of Jaffa. So with that said, I think you would agree that we have a setting for a ghost story in a big way. Oh. And we've really only scratched at that in this story, is to kind of focus on just the story of one particular moment of outrage that takes place in the context of this huge sea of outrage that took place against the people of Jaffa.
Oh man, and like all I can say is wow, because that I did get to see the as you know, you sent me the other issue, or the other issues. It's 3 issues, and I did get to read them. I just didn't add it to the review.
Sure.
It is actually to the point of almost being disturbing. It's not that you did anything graphic. It's just the horrificness of war that I think that we forget. And Band of Brothers really did a good job of showing the horrificness of that one war. But like you're saying, the history is littered with such horrible human acts.
It is. And let me tell you something. It's on all sides. It's not just the bad Nazis or the bad Japanese in World War II or the French fighting the Ottomans. Our own troops have done this. I have personal knowledge of a family member who fought in World War II, and they got drunk and they actually ran over a kid in Germany, a child in Germany. That was our own troops that did that to a child, you know. I think that is not isolated. I assure you of that. It's not isolated.
I think during war, the one thing that we start to forget is that the other side are still human.
Absolutely. It's easy to do acts of violence against somebody that you think is subhuman. Yeah. But I'm convinced that eventually those ghosts that you make, they catch up with you. I really believe that with all my heart. They eventually catch up with you. That's why I think so many of these people that come back from war and they've seen things and done things, you don't do those things and just get away with it. It does haunt you. It does visit you in the darkness at night.
I don't think the human soul or mind was built to be able to get away with anything forever. You know, I think there, like you said, there's a moment of tally, even if we don't talk about it. And that's, you know, what my own book with the Aftermath book, where we talked about the abuse the character went through, and everyone asked me, well, how can you deal with abuse in just one issue? I remember looking at the person and not looking at him because it was online. I was like, well, what makes you think that she dealt with it in one issue? And I think that's something that we, in this current time, we act like something happens, get over it, move on, but that's not how it really works. You don't just get over it, you deal with it. And that's something I stress to a lot of people. You got to go through the steps of dealing with it. And one of the big things I've come in the last couple of years to realize is you got to let go of anger, and you got to let go of your past. Because, I mean, we're in a culture of finger pointing. And reading your book, it reminds me of how dangerous that finger pointing gets, because it leads to wars. And I think it's because this generation hasn't seen a world war, that they don't understand what they're pushing towards by being so intolerant with other ideas.
Yeah. We certainly, you know, it's a strange circumstance, because certainly there are strong elements of our population, of the American population, that has seen war up close. I mean, we have, you know, many service men and women that have been in Afghanistan and Iraq, Somalia and Bosnia. You know, I'm forgetting even, you know, other places that, you know, like I said, it's the, you know, what third world country are we going to wage war in this week?
And still wage war. We don't get to leave. We stay there and it continues. We just don't talk about it on the media.
Yeah.
You know, and you know what really bothers me? The suicide rate, where celebrities suddenly start dying and we start caring, but we don't talk about the veterans. We don't talk about how they can't come back. They back and they can never leave that place and they wind up taking their lives because we're not there for them with support.
Well, I think that there is support out there. Part of what spurred me to write this book is because of my own wife's work. She works for the VA, and she does post-traumatic stress counseling, military sexual trauma counseling, traumatic brain injury. So there are a lot of different things that are going on in terms of outreach to veterans. There's a number. My wife works with the foundation that offers weekend retreats for free, Warrior Mission at Ease, and they're based out of Tampa, Odessa, Florida. And they're only one foundation of many that are out there that are doing their work completely, for free for the veterans. I think we have a long way to go in terms of fully understanding the impact that war has. But, the cost, as you started this whole thing talking about the cost of war, I mean, there is a tremendous cost. It's not just the cost in lives, the cost in broken families, the cost in infrastructure, the cost in buying the military weapons, the bombs, all this stuff. But there is a residual cost of dealing with the medical issues, the psychological issues down. And we're talking about not years, but decades, Rob, decades of medical care, of psychological care after the fact. And that is a cost that is almost never spoken about. But should be a cost that we should think it is way more affordable for us to go to the bargaining table and figure out what is that is causing these problems. And if at all possible, to try to work it out in a peaceful manner, as opposed to immediately having kind of our first move is to bomb the hell out of something. It's not long-term, even if you want to talk about it from a purely business point of view, it's a bad move from a purely business standpoint. There's the cost, like I said, that are going to be decades, with tales of decades.
Yes, and I completely agree with you. And that's why I think a book like yours is so important, because I think it is a wake-up call to a generation of, like you said, we see war, but I remember in the 80s, and I'm sure you remember this, the whole USSR, Soviet Union thing, that scared us. The closest thing to boogeyman we have are some people doing some bad things every so often, and they don't understand that the death toll, as horrific as it is nothing compared to what a war would bring. And you have this generation, they're all excited. We're bombing someone. Why are you excited? You're not bombing the people who did it. You're bombing civilians a lot of times. You're empowering people to be angry at you. And I think books like yours really speak to the narrative, because it does it in a tasteful way, and it shows the humanity of people. Like, even in moments where you think that, well, maybe that character went too far, you're reminded that they're still just a human being reacting to a circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, that was our attempt, obviously, to try to do that. I mean, hopefully we're successful with that. These are complicated issues. I mean, they really are. But I just think that, humanity has the ability to wipe itself off the face of the earth. We've got real problems. We have real problems that humanity is facing. And we spend so much energy and time and financial resources fighting each other. And meanwhile, our planet is in real serious trouble. And the last I checked, we don't have another planet that we can bail on this one and go to that. So we got issues, we've got things that need to be dealt with. And we have to, as a species, learn to talk to each other, learn to be able to compromise with each other, set up win-win situations as opposed to I win, you lose. And ask the question, what is it that I need? What is it that I need? What is it? And to think about, what does the other person need? To be concerned about what their needs are, and to say, well, what role can I play in helping to make those needs be fulfilled? Instead of, this kind of like a winner take all mentality, to really ask ourselves, how much do I have to have? you
and,
know.
and it's interesting that you bring this point up, because I don't think we've touched on this at all during this, because I didn't really give it away, and a lot of people won't watch the video to fully. So to those people who stuck it out this long hearing us, and I think it's a great conversation, why don't we explain to them the magic that you use with the shifting of the scenery between characters, because that's a very powerful thing. And I love how you put it. We don't see the world through other people's eyes, but in your book, you do.
Yeah, I mean, that was a fun part of this work. It was always part of the vision for the work, was to basically have each of the characters, like I said, we have 4 characters, each of them to have their own art style. And in fact, in most cases, the characters actually have their own artists. There's one artist, Kyle Houston, that actually does 2 of the characters. He does the U.S. Marine, and he also does the Confederate soldier, but he does them in different styles. So they have, while they have a similar look, there's enough, I think, difference there to be able to have them visually stand out. And even the color palettes that he's using are very different on purpose. And then we have 2 other artists that are working on the other 2 characters. The Henri Jacques Tournier is done by Cristobal Torres. And then we have the Sandakwa, the Wendat, the native. He's done by Bethany Varney. And I think that that's a very powerful storytelling tool, because you're constantly being asked to see reality through another person's lens, and what you see changes. And even the shepherd, you'll notice if you're paying attention in this story, the shepherd is constantly changing clothes. What he's wearing fits the context. So you could see, for example, he dresses like a U.S. Marine in parts of the story. In other parts of the story, he's dressing like a Frenchman from the 17th century. In other parts of the story, he's dressed as a Frenchman from the 18th century. So we definitely have that kind of shifting context here that you can see on that page right there. That's the shepherd with the facial hair, and he is wearing a lieutenant's garb of the French 22nd Light Demi Brigade, which was one of the units under Napoleon that fought in that Battle of Jaffa.
Now, you did your homework for this.
Oh, yeah.
And I knew it just reading it that there was a tone of history too, because I am a history. I wouldn't call myself a history buff, but I love history, and I love it because it shows the errors of humanity, and it kind of teaches me how to become a bigger and I think better person by looking back on the past. But how did you get all this information? Was it just Google searches?
Oh, well, you know, some of that, you start there. Keep in mind that my background is, I have a doctorate in early Christian history and literature. So I'm trained as a historian. Okay. So that's why you see such a strong bent of history there. The techniques, regardless of what time period you're working in, are basically the same. You're always wanting to look at the, stop it right there, right where you're at. Do you see the gentleman who's writing with the quill pen at the bottom of that middle the middle page there?
Yeah.
His name is General Berthier. And I'm just going to use him as an example. One of the sources that any historian, what you want to do is get your hands on what's called primary sources. Primary sources are materials that are written hopefully ideally by the people who actually did the activities or lived in that time period and were witness to those activities. One of the sources that I consulted about the Battle of Jaffa was actually the memoirs of General Berthier. I also read the memoirs of Napoleon Bonaparte himself, as well as other soldiers who happen to be on site. And, you know, you actually glean this information. Of course, then you consult what scholars are writing about the battle. Same thing with the Sandakwa. Sandakwa is as I said, the Wendat. In his case, we actually have a beautiful source that I stumbled upon. It's written by a man who was a Franciscan missionary. He was not a priest, not a Catholic priest, but a Catholic brother. So in other words, he lives a life of celibacy, of simplicity, of poverty. He has dedicated himself to working with the poor. His name is Gabriel Sagard. and Gabriel Sagard actually travels to the land of the Wendake, where the Wendat live, which is in modern Ontario, south of Lake Huron. And he actually traveled there as a missionary and lived with the Wendat and actually describes their life, how they live, what they eat, how they hunt, their cultural and religious beliefs. And of course, as a historian, you know that he's seeing it through the lenses of a Christian, celibate, white male. And so you have to, as a historian, kind of say, okay, he's going to have prejudices based on these realities, you know. And so you kind of take what he says with a bit of a grain of salt when those points come up in the, like, for example, the Wendat approach to sex is much more open. Their young people are basically, you know, living a life of what we would call free love, like in the 1960s here in the United States. And of course, being a celibate male Christian, he's going to have an issue with that, which is to be expected. And yes, as you read through his diary, yeah, he has an issue with it. So you kind of say, okay, the negative view that he has on this, he's putting a spin on it based on his, you know, his preconceived notions. But they may have, you have to accept that the Wendat may have a completely different perspective on why they make these kind of cultural choices. So as a historian, that's what you have to do, is you have to get your hands on primary materials that will get you as close to your subject as you possibly can.
Oh man, like I love talking to guys like you who really can know to get to the history, because there's so much about the current time period that we're in that we're losing our history, and it's really horrible. My nephew, who is 14, barely knows about World War II. And how could we have so quickly forgotten how important it is to tell those stories? And it scares me.
Yeah, it is. I think part of it is it all has to do with how history is taught. If you teach history as a series of battles and dates and stuff like that, I think it gets very cold and very unapproachable very quickly. However, if you as a teacher, if you teach history as a bunch of stories, that's what it is. It's actually, story is actually part of history, the word history. And I think if you begin to show how the realities are really, these are stories, human stories. And you can begin to see the connections with our own day and time. Like, for example, this, I hope as you read the story of Henri Jacques Tournier, you saw the shocking similarities between that story and our own invasion of the Middle East in Iraq and Afghanistan. Basically, it's the French invasion of Egypt and then eventually what is modern day Israel is the story of a Western culture not getting the Middle East, not understanding the Middle East. Yeah. And, you know, that story is playing itself out again. You know, it's like the West doesn't get the Middle East. We want them to think like we think, and they don't think like we think. And instead of accepting those differences, those realities, we want to impose our culture upon them. You know, like, for example, you know, our democracy, you know, we think democracy is the best form of government, and it may well be, but they've seen it before. And for many of them, it isn't the best form of government. Right or wrong, it's kind of a cultural decision. And there's a certain, you know, reality that at a certain point, you know, you can try to impose your political structure on another culture, and it's going to have, you know, varying degrees, as we can see, varying degrees of success with that attempt. And we certainly saw it with the French trying to do it in this this particular historical period.
And you know what? I did catch that. And what's worse is that I caught the fact that we've repeated the same war crimes.
In a very real sense, that you see this same kind of thing repeating itself. That's what history seems to do. You know, there's the famous quote that if you don't learn from history, you're damned to repeat its mistakes. And it seems to be that humanity, if we do one thing well, it's repeat our mistakes. We really do. Sad, but true.
And you know what? I think that's a perfect place to actually end it, because it is true. We repeat our mistakes. And I think it's literature like yours that helps remind a generation of exactly what's happened And I think it's very powerful. And I think that you should actually seek to see if maybe you could get this into libraries and have kids talk about it, because I think that they've lost history. I don't think we put history like what we once did as being so important.
Well, I mean, you know how I feel about history, so I'm not going to argue with you.
And now, of course, tell them where they can get this amazing book that I have given the thumbs up to and called AnderSin Approved.
All right. Well, right now, as I said, you can get this on Amazon. You can easily access it on Amazon. The Amazon also has the Kindle available. So if you prefer the digital, it will eventually be out on Comixology, Drive-Through Comics, Google Books. You'll be able to order it. It will be run out through Diamond. I'm guessing that that opportunity will come probably sometime in the fall. My publisher hasn't given me the information of when that happens yet, but all this will come in time. But for now, if you can easily get your hands on it, like I said, Amazon is the fastest way to do it, or you can meet up with me at one of the conventions I'll be doing, and there are still quite a few that I have on the docket for this year, and I'd be happy to sign it for you.
Now, where is your next, as I call it up on Amazon, where is the next place that they will find you?
I'm going to be in Fort Myers at SpaceCon in next weekend. That's what, the 15th and 16th. I don't have the calendar in front of me. Is that 15th, 16th?
Yeah, I think so. It's a 14th. Let me see. I'm trying to see. And actually, I took down my calendar. Oh, it's the 15th, 16th. I took down my calendar for all my events because I'm updating it.
Okay.
I added a few shows.
So that, yeah, I mean, so there's that. And then I'll be going to Mississippi Comic-Con, June 23rd, 24th, back here to Florida for the SuperCon in mid-July. That's the 12th to the 15th. And then Tampa, which is always one of my favorite shows. I love going to Tampa. I like Tampa. It's one of my favorite Florida cities. And the people at that show are just really nice. I really like the people that I meet there. And the support that I've had in Tampa and that area has been really fabulous. After that, in August, it's off to the Infinity Toy and Comic Con, and that is in Kissimmee. And then Dragon Con, which will be our first fight with the dragon in Atlanta, tail end of August, beginning of September.
But Dragon Con's just not a regular show for you, is it?
Pardon? I'm sorry?
Dragon Con's just not a regular show for you, is it?
No, that's not. They've actually invited me to be a guest, which is very exciting. I'm not used to that, but certainly appreciate that. Hope to live up to that and be worthy of it.
Well, you've already lived up to it in what you've created.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And stay on. We're just going to sign off of the live thing, and then I'm going to wrap up talking to you. And the only thing I can say, guys, is that this is the book to buy. It is really a very powerful book. This is why indie comics is better than Marvel and DC right now, because of creators like Andre and the amazing work he's done, not only with The Shepherd, but with the amazing follow-up, The Path of Souls, now available on Amazon. You know, you want to support indie comics and support great things, here's a great book to begin on your path of supporting greatness. All right, guys, that's it for me. And remember, you can follow both of us by going to Indie Advocates. Both of our stuff is on there. I am Mr. AnderSin. I was joined today by Mr. Molinari, who's an amazing creator. Please follow him and go to his Facebook page and fan page for the book and like it. All right, guys, I'm out of here. I'll see you at the next review.